Welcome back for a review of One Piece chapter 1048. Last week's chapter ended with Luffy and Kaido preparing to clash in the skies above Onigashima, and this week also ends with Luffy and Kaido preparing to clash in the skies above Onigashima. So we don't have much in the way of forward momentum, but there were still a lot of interesting details in the chapter we need to talk about. But before getting into the discussion, let me quickly say welcome to anyone new to the channel. I do weekly One Piece chapter reviews, theory videos, and discussions. So if you're interested, please consider subscribing. It really helps this channel grow, and I really appreciate your support. So now getting into the discussion, the first thing I'd like to mention is this week's installment in the Germa 66 cover story arc. The previous installment on the cover of chapter 1046 left us with a mystery, as two silhouetted figures arrived on Cacao Island. While there are of course a multitude of possibilities for who these characters could be, the obvious answer to the question of their identity was the two remaining Vinsmokes, Reiju and Ichiji, particularly considering the focus of this cover arc. However, as I discussed previously, it also seemed like a distinct possibility that members of Blackbeard's crew had arrived to rob Big Mom's road poneglyph in her absence. It seems that mystery has now been put to rest, as we see Broly emerge from the Mirror World in the ruins of Whole Cake Chateau to inform Cracker that Ichiji and Reiju have arrived on the scene. This seemingly rules out the possibility that Blackbeard and crew invaded Tottland. Now, as much as this suits my own personal belief that Blackbeard could arrive with some of his Titanic captains at the end of Wano in pursuit of Kaido's Devil Fruit or some other prize, I also want to present a thorough analysis and don't want to be too quick to make any assumptions. It's worth noting that we don't actually see Reiju and Ichiji revealed this week, only Broly relaying the message to Cracker, and the caption reads, "I think Germa has come to Chocolate Town," which again isn't quite definitive. While there's no explicit reason to doubt the veracity of this claim, it's still possible Broly's mistaken, and that Oda is planning to subvert this expectation in the next installment. That being said, we've gone quite some time without seeing any Vinsmokes in this Vinsmoke cover arc, and so a completely separate set of outside intruders could be too much of a distraction. Overall, the simpler explanation here, and by Occam's razor more likely, is that the invaders have been positively identified as Reiju and Ichiji, but until we actually see the Vinsmokes, there remains considerable uncertainty. Moving into the actual chapter, we both pick up and end on Luffy clashing with Kaido in the skies above Onigashima. So as said at the start, there isn't necessarily much in the way of forward momentum, but there is nevertheless merit to this week's chapter, which is heavily focused on the suffering Kaido and Orochi's reign has incurred on the people of Wano, highlighted by the chapter's title, 20 Years. For 2 decades, the people of Wano have suffered under their oppressive regime, waiting for the liberation Odin promised them would someday arrive. Roughly the first half of the chapter remains focused on the present. Kaido tells Luffy he's not going to dodge and will instead face Luffy's massive attack head on. On the surface, it would very much appear the end is fast approaching, but as I will touch on later in the review, I stand by my belief that despite the dramatic nature of this clash, we still haven't reached the true finale of Luffy and Kaido's battle. That being said, there are several interesting details in this scene we need to discuss. First, we see Momo is still dwelling on his insecurities despite the progress he made in last week's chapter, as he's still unable to generate his own flame clouds, and thus again resorts to ramming Onigashima with his head. As I said last week, I think Momo still struggling with doubts and insecurities despite his progress is realistic, though it would seem his triumphant moment may soon be at hand. Last week, Luffy tenaciously held onto Kaido to ensure the King of Beasts doesn't evade his impending attack. Getting a clearer view of Luffy's fist, it appears his arm is compressed, much like his Gear 4 Kong attacks. Fittingly, he maintains the monkey-based nomenclature with this giant version using the name Bajrang, which derives from a monkey deity in Hindu mythology. One point I neglected to mention last week is that seeing the size of Luffy's attack, it would seem he now possesses the ability to destroy an entire island, which has some potentially interesting endgame implications regarding the prophesied destruction of Fishman Island at the hands of a silhouetted figure matching Luffy's appearance. It appears Luffy maintaining his hold on Kaido was unnecessary, as the reigning emperor agrees to take Luffy's punch head on. Interestingly, this decision echoes Big Mom intentionally enduring Kid's railgun attack in her earlier battle against Law and Kid, perhaps representing the hubris of the current emperors, a topic we discussed at length in the chapters concerning her defeat. This is yet another reason I don't think this punch is meant to finish off Kaido. It's worth remembering Big Mom was outmaneuvered but not overpowered by Law and Kid. In that sense, her hubris leading to her apparent downfall was fitting. Conversely, I'm not so sure it will be particularly satisfying if Kaido's defeat comes from an attack he could have potentially evaded. In order to match the scale of Luffy's fist, Kaido uses his flames to engulf his entire body, creating a massive flame dragon, which is very similar in appearance to King's final attack against Zoro. I really like the appearance of this new form, which seemingly makes Kaido far more powerful, but it's worth mentioning this doesn't quite fit the bill for Kaido's awakening. Another point I thought was rather interesting was Luffy's choice of phrase as he and Kaido clash. He says he's going to smash Kaido all the way down to the bottom of hell, fitting with the recurrent symbolism throughout the Onigashima raid. This again reinforces my belief that ghosts or spirits are going to have some part to play in the endgame of the battle, coinciding with the arrival of the New Dawn and the end of the Fire Festival. But I also wonder if this choice of phrase might have any implications regarding Kaido's ultimate fate. Luffy says he's going to smash Kaido all the way to the bottom of hell, rather than something more generic like "I will defeat you." This colorful turn of phrase symbolically fits with the metaphorical hell Orochi and Kaido created on Wano these past 20 years, but could also hint toward the manner in which Kaido will ultimately be dealt with once the dust settles. I'm going to dedicate a full video to this topic, but there's a very real question of what it means for an emperor to fall. Could this phrase be a reference to Kaido's impending incarceration on the bottom level of Impel Down, a prison often referred to as Hell? Or could Kaido really be sent to the Underworld as the first of Luffy's enemies to meet his end in battle? At this point, I think both options are on the table, but it's worth remembering that even if Kaido and Big Mom's emperor status is compromised by the erosion of their territories and armies, individually they're still far more powerful than the vast majority of pirates sailing the seas, and thus it's necessary for their strength to be somehow mitigated in the wake of their defeats, else they quickly reclaim their emperor status. Now, as I've mentioned previously, I don't think Big Mom's story is finished, but Kaido needs some form of resolution on Wano. Over the next several pages, we see a flashback to Wano in the wake of Oden's death. We didn't learn anything new from this flashback, but it was nevertheless interesting to see these familiar scenes from a different perspective. I am glad we got to see on panel the uprising of the daimyo against Kaido following the Hour of Legends, which we had previously only heard about. There were some pretty cool panels depicting Kaido in dragon form, fighting off the entire Wano army in the ruins surrounding Oden's castle. Ultimately, these scenes help to underscore the weight of the suffering Wano has endured for these past 20 years, as their once thriving nation slowly devolved into a desolate wasteland. So while it might not make for the most interesting individual chapter, I think these pages will be more impactful reading through the entire battle from start to finish. Beyond Kaido's brutality, this mini flashback also highlights Orochi's utter depravity, which serves as an effective bridge back into the present, as we see Orochi now engulfed in flames, attempting to bring Hiyori down with him. It's fitting his immolated serpentine form mirrors Kaido's flame dragon attack, and he too references hell and the afterlife. As expected, Denjiro suddenly arrives on the scene, ending his 30-chapter absence as he strikes down Orochi and catches Hiyori in an embrace, now safe from Orochi. This outcome was fairly predictable, and as I said last week, I'm a bit disappointed Hiyori didn't play a more active role in stopping Orochi. In fact, given the ease with which Denjiro emerged victorious, it would seem Hiyori's diversion with the Sea Stone Nail proved entirely unnecessary. I do think this is most likely the end for Orochi, as he's now been decapitated 8 times, matching his 8 heads. Last week I suggested that the next would be his last, which very much appears to be the case this week. That being said, I do still think there's a very slight possibility Orochi manages to slither away from Onigashima, as decapitation, even for a villain as despicable as Orochi, seems like a bit of a dark and grisly end compared to Oda's typical writing style. I have suggested several times in the past that Oden's sword Ame no Habakiri could somehow play an important role in stopping Orochi, based on its mythological namesake, famous for slaying the fabled Yamada no Orochi, which could still be the case if Orochi somehow manages to survive. It seems potentially noteworthy that the sword has not yet appeared in the present, despite being in Hiyori's possession. I do think the Kurozumi plotline does still need to be resolved in the falling action, and so I could see a scouring of the Shire type scenario, with Orochi emerging from the ashes, so to speak. If this is the end for Orochi, however, I do think it's rather fitting and deserved. And as much as I'm disappointed that Hiyori wasn't more involved, Denjiro's arrival may have been predictable, but was ultimately effective and a satisfying end to Wano's despotic shogun. And so this brings us back to the clash between Luffy and Kaido, and following the mini flashback, it does feel like the battle is going to end sooner rather than later, yet personally I still remain unconvinced. This chapter again focuses on the what without answering the why question. Why is Kaido occupying the land of Wano? What motivates his efforts to amass an army and start a global war? As I've been saying for some time, I believe we need to see Kaido's backstory before the dust settles, because it will inform why he's trying to accomplish what he's trying to accomplish. While the tone of this chapter certainly suggests we're at the climax of the battle, I still get the impression there's at least one more twist coming. I've suggested numerous times in the past that Kaido's been imbued by his mythical fish fruit with incredibly good fortune, preventing his defeat in one-on-one battles. While I still believe this could very well be the case, I want to make clear that ultimately theories are just for fun. I still stand by this theory and my commentary from the past several chapter reviews, that there hasn't been any dramatic change or shift which necessarily justifies Luffy suddenly emerging the victor. Yet the tone of this chapter implies a degree of finality I wasn't necessarily expecting yet. I did like the use of the paper lanterns to signal Orochi and Kaido's impending demise, but I also think the complete disconnect between the raid on Onigashima and the celebration on Wano is notable, and could suggest another phase of the battle in full view of Wano's citizens as the dawn at last arrives. Personally, I'm predicting Luffy's giant punch will appear to knock out Kaido, granting a false victory of sorts. It's perhaps at this point we could be granted insight into Kaido's backstory, a topic I discussed in depth in an earlier theory video. I expect that if we do learn more about Kaido, it will concern the earliest chapters of his life rather than his years with rocks. Perhaps from the rubble, awakened Kaido will emerge and prove too powerful for even awakened Gear 5 Luffy to face alone. And it's here we could see the intervention of the Akazaya Samurai, the 9 shadows from Toki's prophecy, providing Luffy the strength he needs in mortal, ghost, or even shadow form. As Crocodile said in Impel Down, awakened zone users don't stay down for long. Demonstrating this principle, Luffy has already had multiple miracle resurrections throughout the course of this battle, and I expect Kaido could be afforded at least one himself. Yet I can't deny the possibility that I'm incorrect, that we have truly reached the finale. I can't really say how I'll feel about this being the conclusion without actually seeing how things unfold on panel, but I admit I'll be a bit disappointed if we don't learn any more details about Kaido's motivation before this arc is finished. If Luffy indeed completely overpowers Kaido, I also have some questions and mild concerns about power scaling, everyone's favorite topic, but I'll save that conversation for another video. Overall, I enjoyed this chapter. It may not have been the most exciting or moved the story forward in any significant way, but I think the flashback scenes highlighting Wano's suffering will be particularly impactful when reading through the entire battle from start to finish. There were a lot of interesting small details, and whether or not my analysis regarding how close we are to the climax is correct, I'm really interested to see what happens next. That's all for this week's chapter review. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to be notified when future videos are posted, please consider subscribing and remember to hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. It really helps this channel grow and I really appreciate your support. But most important, what did you think about this week's chapter? Make sure you let me know your thoughts down in the comments.